at the edge, right? There's times where I battle a deep depression where it's like, I just can't do this. I can't keep going on. I should just end this. Really, the answer is to let go of the debt and stop looking to bring justice myself. Stop looking to get the debt to be paid myself, and to release that to God and let Him take care of it. How inspiring people find Him. I look in the mirror. I know I'm very aware of a lot of my faults, not all, sure, but a lot of my faults and my weaknesses and the ways that I have hurt people in my life and the way, that's before me, right?
If somebody read your resume right now, business owner, author, father, you have 6 sons, kind of a Senate candidacy, what part of your story do you think people miss?
I think they miss how integrated it is, right? I think it's easy to focus on one part or another and not realize how interconnected all those different parts are. And, we tend today to think that we can isolate all these little parts of our lives or to, you could be one way at work and a different way, completely different at home and different in your politics. And, really we're made to be integrated into a comprehensive person, right? And, the way I run my business is influenced by my faith. The way that I work in politics is influenced by my faith, my family, and the way that I raise my kids and the way that I have structured my family is very much influenced, by that faith and by trying to be the best version of me possible, the person that God created me to be. And I think it's easy to miss that when you just look at the work aspect or you just look at the family aspect. It's easy to miss how there's that central core that then radiates out into all these aspects of life.
Yeah, that's true. I get that. Take me back to your childhood. You're 4 years old. What happened?
My birth parents, they got married in high school, and I think it was a they felt it was necessary, right? I think they thought they were expecting a child, and they decided to do what they thought was the right thing and get married. And I think that they also both came from hard families on their own, right? And so fast forward a while, and they've got me and my sister, and my dad was in construction. My mom was trying to keep the house. It's back in the 70s. So if you can imagine, the rock music culture, the drug culture, all of that was very real. All of that was very real for my family. Like, I think my father was very much into the drug culture and, lots of partying, lots of good times. And he's an ironworker by trade. Ironworkers have, a reputation for living on the edge, and they work really hard and they party really hard. And I think at a certain point, my mom was like, look, we got to grow up. We've got kids. and then so you get to when I was 4 around 1980, the economy was really kind of in a pretty hard spot, especially in construction, right? There wasn't a lot going on. And so he went to California to go find work, which he did, and, found somebody else that he wanted to spend his life with. And next thing you know, he's filing for divorce and he grabbed my sister, he came back and, my understanding of it is that he loaded up my older sister and I into the car and said, hey, we're just going on vacation for 2 weeks. And then, we didn't see our mom for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of I don't remember a ton of that. I talked extensively with my sister about this period. She had finished 2nd grade and taken a bunch of worksheets and school homework and stuff like that with her when we went on this trip. And, she used these extra school worksheets and homework to help us pass the time, right? To teach me what she was learning in 2nd grade and teach me to read and kind of be like a little mini mom, right? I think she was 7 and I was 4, and it was just a pretty bad time, right? Because we lived in a hotel for a bit, and then Dad would go to work during the day, we'd stay at the hotel, right? It's the sort of stuff that like today society doesn't tolerate that sort of stuff today. They're pretty harsh with that, but 45 years ago, I think it just slid right under the radar. And, and then of course the divorce went through, and it was, California, and the custody got split up. Right. So, my sister, whom I had bonded with deeply because she was taking care of me, went home to my mom, and I stayed with my dad and now my new stepmom, and, started there. And then it was back and forth at the holidays, and, it was, I know it doesn't sound that extreme the way I'm explaining it, but at the same time, it's like, okay, when you pull a 4-year-old away from his mom, and he doesn't see his mom, that's a very traumatic experience for that 4-year-old,
Yeah, I
right?
bet. Uh,
And
I can't imagine being taken away, especially like the way you described it. It's like, oh, we're just gonna go for a ride and we'll be right back, and then that ride never ends, and all of a sudden you don't see your mom for who, for you, it's 6 months, a year, whatever it is. That could be very traumatic, especially because like, hey, where's mom? Did your dad tell
right,
you everything, like where she was, or what was
no,
the
no, I don't think he did.
explanation? There was no explanation.
Yeah, I don't think he would get, given a good much of an explanation. I know I did ask my sister that a lot. Where's mom? When are we going to see mom? And
Did you ever
it's fun.
discuss that with him later as you were older?
I didn't. I haven't talked to him about it a lot. It's very interesting. Just as I've gone through all the work I've gone through to try to integrate all of these experiences and to process and move forward to grow through it. One of the things I've realized is that some people it's worth talking to and seeing their perspective, and they're willing to be honest, and they're willing to you know have a fair conversation, and other people, they are not going to have an accurate version of what they did or what they,
Mhm.
how they're gonna. It's not worth the time, right? And
Right.
I love my dad very much, and I pray for his final perseverance, and we're still business partners. We still have a very close working relationship on a professional level, and at the same time, I'm fairly confident that I wouldn't get real answers about something that happened
Mhm.
45 years ago, right? And I don't need made up answers.
Yep.
So I haven't spent a lot of time talking with him about it, and uh, I've talked a little bit with my mom about it. I've talked more with my sister about it, because I think when I look at my story, a lot of what goes alongside of that too, right, is, I would say there's still some shame around this, but there's still, like before my parents split up, like I had my first exposures to pornography and to sexuality, right? And that type of material was readily available, throughout my youth and celebrated. And that's also, very, very toxic for children, right?
Yeah.
Like I think it's very easy to take it for granted today because it's so prevalent. It's
Mhm.
everywhere,
Yeah, you
and
can't really go without finding it anywhere.
and even just mainstream television, would be considered softcore pornography, 40 years ago, and then let alone, widespread internet pornography and stuff has made it just so easily accessible today. And I think we don't understand how damaging that is to young minds, to young brains. Like at a physical neurological level, we're causing serious harm, right?
Yeah,
And
I do
research
agree with
today
that.
shows that. Research shows that today. And then you layer that onto the fact of, okay, when we get the neuro programming of trauma responses, like the younger the trauma happens and the stronger the response mechanism, the more it can very deeply imprint itself in the neurological pathways of the brain. And we've learned now that those response pathways, they get embedded in the brain at the stage of wherever the brain is developing at that point in time. So the younger you are and you have these trauma responses, the deeper into your autonomic nervous system it can be, to where, some of these trauma responses can bypass a lot of the prefrontal cortex functions. And, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, definitely. Going through all of that, what wounds from your childhood would you say stayed with you the longest?
I think the obvious one is the sexual wounds, right? The exposure to pornography, and then the shame culture around, sexuality, and around those types of behaviors that come with exposure to pornography and with sexuality out of its orderly and its normal sequence of events, right? I mean, sex and sexuality in its God created environment is a truly beautiful, wonderful thing. I think it's really easy when we see ourselves or our kids falling into misbehavior to get angry, to blame, to challenge, to go, why aren't you doing better? Why aren't you stopping? Like, what's the matter with you? You're terrible. You're a bad
Mhm.
person. And we forget that, a lot of times these things happen. And I again, as a Catholic, I very much believe in the activity of the devil, and that he's out to get us, right? And that, rather than seeing these things as an attack of the enemy, I think there was a lot of shame culture, and that took a lot of work to really get to see the depth of the damage that was done. early on snowballed, right, into something somewhat unmanageable because of all of the shame cycle around that. And then I think another thing that really stuck with me was, okay, when the people that you trust to be there are constantly gone, right? As a child, you're taken away from your mother. Okay, you can somewhat process that, not consciously, but subconsciously. As my mother died, I'm alone. This is bad. Okay, now I'm trusting this other person, my sister, who's caring for me, taking care of me. Okay, now she's gone, and now I'm with this strange new woman who somewhat seems to care for me, but maybe does, maybe doesn't. Right? I think that I think that made it a lot harder to trust and to engage in a solid relationship, built around real, genuine intimacy and trust, rather than just physical intimacy. And that's a challenging place to live from, right? Is not having
Yeah.
that sense of trust and that the person's going to be there for you.
Yeah, the sense of stability that something continues,
Mhm.
that a lot of things I think children need to grow. When did you realize it was something that it was still affecting you as an adult?
I spent around all of the sexual issues and the pornography exposure. That's something that kind of tormented me and was a struggle for a very long time, to where I really got to a place of despair around it, where it was, I've tried everything, I've done everything, I've followed every confessor's advice that they've given me, and nothing seems to be changing. And since God's grace is sufficient, clearly I'm the problem.
Yeah.
And that got to be a really challenging spot. And then at a certain point, I'm like, okay, I've tried all these, I've tried this. Now I guess I'm going to talk to, I'll try going to a counselor, to a regular counselor. And that took a while to find one that really had a sense of the faith, as well as a sense for the the psychological and neurological underpinnings of what was going on, and for them to help walk me through the trauma responses, and to walk me through the underlying issues, to where it was like, look, if this is something that started at 3 years old and was reinforced and reinforced and reinforced as a trauma response pattern, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that's more compulsion than voluntary actions. And you've been told there that it's voluntary, and you've been told that you're responsible, and that you should be shamed for this. And at the same time, like, that's not how we're seeing this in modern psychology and modern neurology, or neurological understanding of the human. What if we approach this from a different direction? And that made a tremendous difference, right, in being able to be a lot more compassionate with myself, and to understand the situation, and start actually recovering.
Did you feel like you recovered well after all of that stuff, and everything helped out the way you expected?
It's up and down, right?
Mhm.
I think a lot of those deep-seated patterns and deep-seated neurological things, they, when you hit a bump in the road, or you hit one of those major life triggers, again, the deeper seated those neurological pathways are in the brain, they do sometimes creep up and take over. So, and at this point, I very much am in a place of, relying very much on God's grace and mercy, and knowing that, I think, if I didn't have these struggles, I would be an immensely proud and insufferable person,
Yeah.
but I think he allows us to fight and struggle in order to make sure that we rely on him, and that we remember our place in the universe.
So, okay, so somewhere between you were a kid, you went through some trauma, you got moved across state lines, and then you became a guy who built a multi-million-dollar company. There's a stretch, a part that I don't think a lot of people don't know about or don't want to understand. So I'm very curious about it. How do you end up living in a monastery in France? How does that happen? How do you go from that kid to, I'm going to become a monk in France?
Sure. I'm not trying to play on the name of the podcast, but generally when I do something, I'm all in. And so when I became Catholic, one of the things that kept coming up for me was, once I converted about 12 years old, was, man, I think God would like me to be a priest. And then I'm like, but I really like girls. But I think he wants me to be a priest, but I really like girls. And it was this, that early phase of my life, before I went to the monastery, a lot more of my life was spent going, no, God, I don't want to do what you want me to do. I'm sorry, I want to go do this or I want to go do that. I don't want to do what you want me to do. And I got halfway through my first year of college, and it just was so clear to me that, okay, God really does want you to go do this, and you're not ever going to be happy unless you go explore this and unless you go try this. And the path wasn't straight and easy to go try, because I left school to go explore, how do I get into the religious life or into the priesthood. I ended up having to come back and go back to work and, pay some family bills so my family didn't lose their house. Went on a few other adventures along the way, trying to kind of go, well, maybe I'm not ready for this yet. And eventually, after a few misadventures and near-death experiences, I was like, okay, God, you win. You want me in the religious life? I will go. I will go. I will do this. And so I worked and paid off the debts that I had. And my long-term mentor, Father Brian Hawker, he wrote a letter of introduction to the monastery in France. He agreed to take me over there after they accepted me. And so he and I jumped on a plane and we flew over. It really wasn't as complicated as a process to get accepted as a person would think. It was, I'm living at a religious house. I'd like to come stay at your monastery and explore, living and being part of your community, and them saying, okay, come on over.
That's kind of cool.
Once I got there, it was, one of them, it was that you mentioned earlier, a lot of people aren't familiar with what happens in religious life, and that you were very curious about it. And man, it's an amazing way of life. There's all sorts of different religious orders. They all have like different missions, different rules that they follow, right? Different like schedules. The one I went to was a Dominican order monastery over in France, and it's just a beautiful life. You get up early in the morning, very early in the morning, and the older priests and the monks, they will pray the divine office. So a lot of people don't know that Catholic priests and religious, they pray what's called the divine office, which is they have different hours of the day, traditional hours of the day, like matins, the morning hours, lauds, the daybreak hours, right? Prime, the first hours, tierce, the third hour, and so on and so forth, all the way till Compline, which is the closing of the day. And the Psalms, all 150 Psalms, are incorporated into these hours in the office all the way through the week. And so once a week, all of these priests and all of these monks and brothers and nuns, like they're praying essentially all 150 Psalms every week,
Oh, wow.
right? In addition to, they have mass. In addition to, they have, a period of meditation every day, right? And so it's a very orderly schedule. It's very much about opening yourself up to God and how God, how He works and how He does things. And the order of it is very beautiful, right? And then, you have your assigned roles and assigned tasks. And I don't know, I loved it. At first it was hard. At first I got really homesick, and I think about 3 months in, because France is very different than America. And
yeah,
I didn't speak French I didn't speak French when I went over there. And so they thought, okay, well, we'll get you French lessons, but everything will be by immersion, and you're not allowed to speak English. I think on Sundays during the little 30-minute recreation period, we got permission to speak English, but the rest of the week, it was, if there was an opportunity to speak, it was in French, and it worked.
Was there,
right? I did.
were there other Americans there, or was it just you? Like, was there a group of people that were there together?
Eventually there was another American. There was an Australian young man who was there. There were several young French people that were there in the novitiate. And, of the other brothers that were there, I mean, there were some from Switzerland. There was, several Frenchmen. There was a Canadian, right? So it was really an international community. So, yeah.
Okay, so you were saying that you were trying to do all this stuff. College didn't work out. I understand you were in the Marines as well. And then you go to this 1,000-year monastery. Still can't believe it's 1,000 years old. When you got there, what were you searching for? Like, what was the question that you were trying to answer for yourself?
Rather than a question, it was a sense of abandonment to God, of just saying, okay, I'm not in charge anymore. Like, you be in charge, right? I had been trying to be in charge. I had been trying to direct my life and choose where I wanted to go. And it had, been a train wreck, whether it was just a disastrous time in college, whether it was when I joined the Marine Corps, I was in boot camp and had a massive heat stroke and spent 3 days in the ICU.
Oh, wow.
It was like, okay, God, if this is what you want, I'm here and I want to do what you want. And
So so it was more like a submission. Like from what I'm understanding is you wanted to do your own thing, and then everything can bring you back to this thing, to the church life, the religious life. And even though you try to stay away, it was like he was saying, nope, I don't want you to do that. Come back. No, I don't want you to do that. Come back. And then you ended up there. Is that
and
somewhere?
saying, yeah,
Am I getting it
okay,
right?
yep, that's right. It's very much an act of submission, saying I give you everything. It's all yours. I really honestly thought that's where I was supposed to be. I went through the different stages of being a postulant and then being a novice and going all the way through the novitiate. And typically what happens is you have an early period where you're just exploring the life, and then you enter the novitiate, and that's where you kind of learn how to fit into the community and how to live in the community and what's the rule. And then at the end of that, then if you stay on, then you take your first vows. And so we got to the end of that novitiate period, and I was convinced I was ready to take vows, and the novice master said, well, actually we've decided you should go home and have a family.
Okay. That was going to
So
be my next question. What eventually made you leave? Like, what did you know about yourself walking out or walking in? What was the change? Okay, I've been here for a year. It's time to go home.
yeah, it was really their decision. And
Oh, wow.
I had made the decision that I was going to submit to whatever it was, that if God wanted me to stay, I would stay. If he wanted me to go home, I'd go home. I wasn't, it was definitely about what did he want. And
Did they tell you the reasons why they wanted you to go home?
they did not.
Hmm.
They did not. So, and that's okay. It's looking back and reflecting back, I suspect it had a lot to do with that childhood trauma and the trauma responses, and to the baggage and things associated with that. It's the church takes great pains to make sure that those who are candidates for the priesthood, those who are in religion, that they really have a solid character, and that they're not going to they don't take chances on people who have had a lot of psychological damage and trauma, because if we're paying attention to what's going on in the world, that's often what in recovery circles they would say, hurt people,
Yeah.
right? And the church doesn't want their leaders, the public figures, to be hurting other people. And so sadly, they don't have the tools to deal with that sort of thing as at a lot of levels. And so it's easier for them to say, look, you know what, you should go home, you should have a family, you should live the normal Christian life, and that's sufficient. And that's okay. It really is okay.
Well, I'm a big believer of that things happen for a reason, for the most part. That a lot of times when the door closes, it means that he has something else opened up for you, 5 doors ahead, and you just don't know it yet until you get there. So you walk out of the monastery in France, and somehow how did you end up as an ironworking building? And then you built a company that was, in the INC 5000 at least 5 times. That's not like a small jump. How did you go walk me through the transition between the monastery to your current success?
So when I graduated high school and I was going to go to college, I thought, well, I'm going to go work for the summer to go earn some cash and have a little bit of spending money for college. And like I said, my dad was an iron worker, and so I was able to go be an iron worker with him over the summer and earn some cash. And in those younger periods of my life, every time, I'd try something new, and if it didn't work, or they, in the case of the monastery, got sent home, I was always able to fall back into working as an iron worker. And I was good at it. So when I left the monastery, they said, look, go back home, go be an iron worker. Like, that's a good life. That's what you should do for now. And so I did do that and spent a lot of time traveling. And when I met my wife, we had, I wanted to stay closer to home. So I tried my hand at a few other businesses, which were very modestly successful, but not sufficient to raise a family, not sufficient to support a family. And so I went back to ironworking. And then, fast forward, we got married in 2003, fast forward to 2007. And, my dad got this opportunity to build a large building for a developer in Spokane, Washington. And the developer had worked with him at his previous company. And my dad was kind of looking at it as a one-off opportunity, and it wasn't going to work because if he took that opportunity, then he wouldn't be able to go back to work for his other company that he'd been working for. And we talked about it, and I was like, well, Dad, like if this guy's asking for you to do it, there's an opportunity in the market, and maybe we should start a business doing this. And if he's willing to help us, with all the startup costs and to bankroll the company on this first job, what a perfect opportunity. So we agreed to start our business together. And the gentleman, the developer, he did bankroll the company. And then we very carefully conserved that cash that we made from that job. And we used that to, finance the next job and then the next job. And next thing we know, we had a little bit of a snowball going where it was, you grow from very small to doing $1 million, and then you make the next jump up to $3 or $4 million a year, and then you make the next jump up to $8 million a year, and then the next jump to 11 or $12 million a year, and our best year was $17 million a year, and that's no small feat in our industry.
No, I can't even imagine that much money.
Yeah, well, it often goes out as fast as it comes in. So
yeah, more money, more problems, right?
It can be some real challenges, but we've done well for ourselves at it. It's not a bad business. It's just it can be very challenging. It can be very challenging, very dangerous. And
well, that kind of leads me to the next question that I have for you. So it's very physical, right? It's dangerous labor.
Yes.
What do you think a job like yours, or anybody that has a job that's dangerous and labor heavy, what do you think that teaches a person versus somebody that's sitting in an office for 9 to 5?
I think when you're working with your hands, you're connected to reality. When you think about at its most basic, whether it's a minor, that's not even, if you are a logger and you cut down a tree and you cut that into lumber, you can build something with it and you can see the process. When you have a farm and you work on a farm, you see the animals reproducing and you see them, you harvest some of the animals to eat, to sell. You plant the seeds in the ground. If you do it well, your plants grow up and you have something to eat. The further we get disconnected from those basic processes, kind of the easier I think it is to lose connection with what's real and what's not. That not to say that desk work and office work isn't mentally taxing and isn't hard in its own way, but there is something about being connected to physical reality and what you do that kind of tends to keep us grounded. Kind of tends to keep a person, I think, perhaps a little more based in what's real, as opposed to simulation theories and different philosophies that are out there a little bit. There's also a sense of pride. There's a sense of pride that comes when you are in, say, a construction trade where you work on something that stands the test of time. Like I can drive, as I drive through Salt Lake City, I can see the courthouse that I worked on, and I can see the stadium that I worked on. And when I go to Seattle, I can see multiple buildings that I worked on. When I go through Spokane, Washington, I see multiple buildings that I've worked on and put together. And that also brings an enduring sense of pride in what you do, right? And I think it's very sadly, I think a lot of people work in processes where they do a small part of a very large process, and they don't always get to see the end result of what it is that they're doing, and maybe to have that same sense of pride in where they've invested their labor.
Yeah, you said that, and it made me think of something that we called, at least in EMS, we call them the ghosts of the job. So for you, I just found the contrast very interesting. So for you build this building, you make those things in cities, and you drive by and you see oh, I helped build that building, or I helped create that, and it's going to be there for decades. For us, it's similar, but it's a little bit different. We call them the ghosts because if we drive through, central Texas and like big city, whatever city you're working at, and you drive by a corner, you're like, I had a cardiac arrest in that corner, or, oh, I got almost shot in this other corner, or this is where I saw this kid, get kidnapped or carried or assaulted. So I know it has nothing to do with it, but it just made me think about that because we always carried something with us like that.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very parallel experience.
Yeah,
for sure.
Have you ever read Tim Grover, Relentless? It's
I have not.
he is what used to be coached Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan back in the day. It's a good book, but he talks about a lot of the stuff of in order to be successful, you have to give up a lot of things. You have to sacrifice a lot of things to be able to accomplish a level of success. You created these companies that got awarded and you made $17 million in your best years. What did that cost you? What did you have to sacrifice in order to get there?
I think it's definitely taken a toll on my family. I know we agreed, my wife and I agreed that it was the right path to go down to support our growing family. And I ended up, the last year I was heavily on the road. I think I was on the road 220 nights in a year.
Whoa.
And, for her being home with 6 boys while, her husband's out on the road working, I think took a big toll on her. And, would we do it again? I think we would. But I have to be honest about like that definitely took a toll on her and on the relationship. It's very hard to stay close when you're apart all the time. And then coming back home where it was, we both agreed, I needed to be home more with the boys. That's challenging to integrate back in when you've been on the road a lot. And I know there's a lot of people have that same experience, whether they're, combat veterans that are deployed often and then come back home. It can be really hard to integrate back into home life. And so I know that's been a challenge. I think family relationships too, the extended family relationship have suffered a little bit, right? I come from a very large family. I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters. I'm the oldest boy. And when we started the business, what I would have been, so I'm 49 now. We've been at this for 18 years. So I would have been 31. My next brother after me would have been 16 or 17 years old.
Wow.
So he wasn't really in a position to be an active part of the business. And I think that's caused some consternation to a lot of the siblings is that, here's dad and Denny have this great business that does very well. And we don't have any of it. And how come we don't get to
We're
own a business with dad? And we're not making all
mm,
this money, and I think that's kind of taken a toll on the family relationships, which it's unfortunate. I wouldn't
yeah.
want that, but I can't control how other people respond either to what we do.
Yeah, I get that. So you built this company, you raised 6 sons. From the outside, it looks like you have it all, you kind of figured it out. You went through some hard stuff, you connected with God, came back, started your journey. But from what I understand, that's not the whole story. You've spoken about this in your book. Uh, What was your lowest point internally and what was happening?
So I started, my dad and I started the business together, and numerous times over the years he had wanted to exit the business, to retire. And so my lowest point came, it's probably 4 or 5 years ago now, 5.5, maybe even 6 years ago now. But my lowest point really came where, he had asked if I would buy him out, and we had weathered the COVID storm together and managed to keep the business going through COVID. And there was a COVID related program that would have allowed potentially me to buy him out at a very favorable borrowing term. And we made that offer to him in order to buy him out, and it got bogged down in some just some really minor detail. And it was expressed to me that he didn't think he was going to get paid. He didn't think that it was going to come through, and he was taking all the risk, and so he didn't want to do it. And to me, that came across as I don't trust you, and that really hit me at a very low point. And my wife and I were having some relational struggles at the time, and so investing all this emotional energy into trying to buy him out, into trying to borrow the money to complete the transaction, on top of the relational struggles, like I was really, really down. And then on top of that, it happened at the end of the calendar year, which we do a very large Christmas party where we celebrate all of our leaders and all of our key people. And so I invest very heavily emotionally in that event, in order to, express gratitude to all of these people who make it possible for us to be successful. And that all of that coming together at the exact same point in time, it really just overwhelmed me. And, we got done with the Christmas party, and my wife and I got home very late, and she, we were in this turmoil. I went off into my bedroom to go to bed, and I woke up the next morning and I was just like, I want to shoot myself. I'm like, if I roll to this side, and we live out in the country, like police response time is about 35 minutes, 45 minutes, right? So if you're defending yourself from something, or if there's something bad happening, if you're not taking care of it, then nobody is. And so
Yeah.
we have a culture of, okay, we are an armed society because it's part of how we keep ourselves safe, living out where we keep ourselves, where we live, where we choose to live. And so I woke up and I was just very full of despair. And I'm like, I want to shoot myself. And there's a gun over here on this side of the bed, and there's another gun over here on this side of the bed. And, if I roll either way, I'm going to be right there with a gun. And I'm like, I can't do this. I can't. I can't. And so I ended up like curling up in a ball going, okay, I can't roll either way, or I'm going to do this. And waited for that to pass a little bit. And then it was, okay, if I can just get to my closet, I can ride this out, this feeling, and wait for this to pass because there's no guns in there. And I know, looking back, it all feels kind of silly. But at the time, it was like this intense urge to just end it and be done.
Did anybody around you know how bad it had gotten for you?
That's a great question, because when I talked to my mom about this incident like a year or two later, and my mom was staying with us at the time for the holidays, right? And so, here it is, I'm going through this desperate, like depressive, suicidal episode. My mom's out in the living room hovering with the kids and enjoying the kids. My wife is getting, nervous because I'm locked into my room, and I don't normally lock myself in my room. And when I talked to my mom, again, a year or two later, she said, I knew you were really down, and I knew that you were really close to the edge, and I just didn't know how to talk to you. I didn't know what to say. That was, again, that caused a lot of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wow, like you knew I was hurting, but you didn't bring it up because you didn't know what to say. Like, wow. So I think in a certain sense that inspires me to talk about the episode and to talk about the issue, because we have a lot of preconceived notions about what happens when someone's going through a suicidal episode. Like we don't, but if you haven't lived that experience and you haven't talked to somebody who's been through that experience, it's really easy to just get very, very condemning about it and not realize that like there's some really heavy mental stuff going on. And like for me, part of it was almost like watching myself go through this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not feeling a sense of control over myself in that episode, in that moment. And I think it's helped me be a lot more compassionate with people who have those episodes and who maybe unfortunately do end up taking their life, and to realize
was this the only episode you had?
That's the only episode that was right there at the edge, right? There's times where I battle a deep depression where it's like, I just can't do this. I can't keep going on. I should just end this. I'm tired of living. But that I can work through, and it passes,
Mm-hmm.
Through prayer, through breathing, through just being up and being active. But that's the only episode where it really, like, it was right there.
What do you think so many men, I'm pretty sure that happens to a lot of men. What do you think we carry this weight alone sometimes?
I think a couple factors. I mean, there's a shame factor around it, right? We don't want to seem weak. And I think we have this cultural perception that people who succumb to suicide are just weak. They're just defective. They're sissies. They're, whatever derogatory term you want to apply to it. I don't think we want to admit that we have problems, or that we have a, weakness. I think also there's a lot of pressure on men to perform, and you don't know how the people around you are going to react if you talk to them about it, right? Like if you're in a space where you're having relational issues, and now that's pushing you into a depression and into, a suicidal ideation, and then you tell your significant other, your wife, your spouse, your girlfriend, whatever, that you're having these thoughts, it's the what if she leaves me question, right? And that can be a, its own traumatizing and re-traumatizing event for a lot of men.
Can be. What do you think people misunderstand about strong men on a regular basis?
About strong men?
Yeah. So, we carry, I think a lot of times we have to pretend that we are strong, or we are strong, but you try to show face that nothing bothers you, that you can just push through things, and then you end up bottling it in, and you end up in those situations, kind of like you did in your bed next to the two guns. So what do you think? Do you think people misunderstand something about what it takes to be a strong man, or is it something different?
I think it's a misunderstanding of what strength is. I think it takes more courage and more strength to talk to someone about what's going on in your life. And it takes more courage and more strength to maintain friendships with people that you can talk to about these things than it does to bottle it up, right? It's harder to look at our woundedness and look at the reality of the situation than it is to ignore it. Right? Because everybody's wounded. Everybody has hurts and pains. Everybody has defects, but very few people want to look at them and actually allow the light of God's grace and mercy and of the tools that we have at our disposal at a natural level into our lives to bring healing. Like, because that can be painful and that can be embarrassing. And yet it takes a lot of strength to do that. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes in our desire not to share things and to seem strong, we're actually kind of running away from our problems, right? It's a concept that I really like to dig into a lot is the concept of humility, right? Like, commonly we think that humility is making yourself small. It's putting yourself down. It's self-effacement, but humility really is acknowledging the truth about yourself, the truth about the world. And the truth is that we have strengths and we have weaknesses. God's given us gifts. He's given us gifts in certain ways and we're lacking in others. And accepting the truth about ourselves means we have to accept the bad parts along with the good parts. We have to accept the strengths that we have, but also acknowledge where we're weak. And that takes real strength to do.
Yeah.
That takes real strength to do.
How has your faith changed from that kid who walked into the monastery to the man that's sitting here today?
I think my relationship today with God is dramatically more personal and intimate. I think as a Catholic, it's very easy to get into the routine of, I go to mass, I say my daily prayers, I say my rosary, and think, as long as I'm following the rest of the rules and checking all the boxes, everything's good. And I think we miss out on the fact that God wants to have this deeply personal, intimate relationship with each one of his children, that he wants to give you a big hug, that he wants to hold you and lead you to be the best version of you that you could possibly be, the one that he dreamed of when he made you, instead of some substandard version that we allow ourselves to be. I would say that's the difference now. That's the difference now, is that early on it was about follow the rules and check the boxes. And now it's the rules are there to help make sure that I'm doing the right things, but they're not a burden. They're not heavy. They're just bumpers, to keep me centered up in the lane so that I can move forward in that personal relationship and that falling deeply in love with God and allowing his love to really infuse me and be part of me.
How did faith help you heal? Did it give you something that therapy couldn't?
I think that's a challenging question. Maybe the anecdote that most moved me is the best to give. There was a priest in the Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska, who he runs the diocese's office of family and family well-being, and I believe he runs a subsection on combating pornography in the Catholic Church, in Catholic families and in Catholic life in Lincoln, Nebraska. And this one family brought their son, their 10 or 12-year-old son, in to see the priest. And he, the boy had been caught looking at pornography on the family computer, and the parents were just really upset of how could their son do this, and this was terrible. And they were all sitting down with the priest, and the priest looked at the boy, and the priest said, "Look, Jimmy, what do you think Jesus would say if he walked in the room and saw you looking at that on the computer?" And Jimmy was like, "Oh, he would be so angry. He would be so angry. He would be furious, and he would tell me how terrible I was." And the priest looked at me and says, No, Jimmy, Jesus would come over, he'd turn it off, and he'd put his arm around you, and he would say, "Jimmy, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm so sorry that the devil attacked you this way and that this happened to you. And I love you, and I'm going to do everything I can to make this right." And he would tell you that over and over and over again until you believed it. And even now, years later, that's still that still moves me.
What does forgiveness actually look like in practice for what you went through? From what you said, just the story, how does that apply to you?
When people ask me about forgiveness, I often reference them to a conference that Father John Burns and Sister Miriam James Heidland give on forgiveness, where they talk very much about what's the debt that's owed. And the debt that's owed is separate from the memories that we have and the feelings that we have. and that forgiveness, properly speaking, consists of letting go of the debt that other people owe us for the things they did to us. And that doesn't mean that the memories will go away. It doesn't mean that the feelings will disappear, but it's really a releasing of the debt. And so, like I mentioned earlier, I love my dad very much, and I want, I pray for his final perseverance. I pray that he really truly has that deeply personal relationship with God, and that he's reconciled with God when he dies. And I think he's come a long ways, right? From 45 years ago. I know he has. He's a radically different man now than he was then. And so when I think of the different things that have happened in my life, that's really
It's a lot about healing. I want to ask you about the 6 people who you're responsible for now. What is it like raising 6 sons, or what has it taught you that nothing else could?
not that if you don't have, it's hard to fathom the love of a parent for their child until you actually have your own child. I really find myself a little lost with that question. But with our child, having our children it's been, each of them was very interesting in having them, right? Like our first sons are twins, right? And they're honeymoon babies. So like my wife and I never really had a period of our marriage where we weren't expecting children or raising children. And even that experience with the twins was really pretty unusual, right? We went the rounds with the hospital where, the medical system does a lot of things for their own convenience rather than for what's best for the parents or best for the
Yep.
patients. And, if you're an educated, or you try to educate yourself a little on the process, you can stand up and try to get better care. But that doesn't always go as planned. And then, once those boys ended up being born by an emergency C-section, and, then spending time in the NICU because, they saw something in an X-ray they didn't like and decided to send them over to the NICU at the neighboring city's hospital to make sure they got the care that they needed. And now they're, thriving young men, 6'2" and 6'3", and just,
Wow. That's a big change.
amazing. And then the next boy that came along, he was pretty close on the heels of the twins. And, it was just this very long, drawn out labor that we did a home birth, and it went well, all in all. But, he's been a handful. He's been a handful his whole life, and he's an amazing young man, and then the next child, the next boy, because that last labor had been really long, the midwife said, well, call us when things get a little further along and we'll come and, be there for the delivery. And, they didn't arrive in time. And so I ended up delivering
Oh, wow.
my son at home.
You delivered your own son. That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, that was pretty wild. And then, the next one we had at home again, and that went smoothly. And then, our last son, we had some complications. And so we ended up at a local hospital, and, had the very interesting experience of having a medical professional treat us like we were, third-class citizens who were stupid and didn't know what we were doing, and were irresponsible for not having, a regular doctor when we'd had several successful home births. And, it was, I won't spoil it, but everything went fine, but it was unfortunately that doctor was a particularly, maybe she was having a bad day. I don't know, but
yeah, could be.
She was not particularly kind and gentle with my wife, which was unfortunate.
I think I'm glad everything turned out well for you, but I think there's a different way to approach patients. So I'll tell you from experience, I have been in EMS and having to respond to a lot of bad events. So because we only see the ones that are bad. I'm not defending this doctor. She should have, there's a difference. There's a line between being professional and respectful versus making the patients feel like they're idiots, because they're not. They're just trying to do things their own way. But it is a lot. I think a lot of times we get in a different state of mind because we only see the bad ones. I've been to plenty of births where there's a housewife or a birthing that they do it on their own, and the mom actually ends up dying, or the kids gets hurt, or stuff like that. But we only see the bad ones. We only see the one or two that are bad out of the thousands that go right. So I think we get it's the different perspective of, well, this is definitely not right, because we only see when it goes wrong, versus for you guys, it went all good. And I think sometimes those doctors, especially, I'm not a doctor, so I pass a baton to them, but they get so in their head about this, I am right, you are wrong, because I see it all and we only see the bad ones, and then it never goes right. So I'm sorry you went through that with that experience, because it's not right and it's not fair, because there's thousands of procedures that go right. There's only a handful that end up, causing damage. But so does miscarriage, and so does C-sections that go wrong, but they don't tell you about those. So
Right. Yeah.
what worries you most about young men today?
They don't know why they were made. So they're lost, right? They don't know that God made them and that they're his children, and they're a little lost. That's at the highest level. I think at the next level down, I look at, okay, a lot of young men today seem to be hesitant or reluctant to start a family, right? They want everything to be right, before they start a family, or they for various reasons, right? I mean, whether it's, they don't make enough money, they don't feel like they make enough money, they're not certain this person is the right person to start a family with. I worry about that, right? Like, it's the things that we chase as a society, the things that we chase, they don't have any long-term satisfaction, right? Like today, my 14-year-old son, my youngest son, he had his first day at his first job yesterday, and it was great to talk to him at the end of the day because he was really proud of what he did. And when I look at my sons, they provide a great amount of inspiration and joy in my life, more than any car could, more than any watch could, more than any, chasing women or other pleasures could, right? That family that I have, those children, they bring me so much joy. And I think the current generation is spending a lot of time, chasing things that at the end of the day aren't going to bring joy and fulfillment. And that's sad.
Yeah. The things they chase, things that don't matter, I think, or maybe they've forgotten lessons that were taught to us when we were younger, or the older generations thought that we didn't teach them. Maybe. Do you think the
And that's
responsibility
possible.
lies on? Do you think the responsibility lies on us? Gen Xers, that we didn't pass those lessons.
I think it's a multi-generational problem, right? When I look at my dad and my mom's generation, how well did they do whatever their faith was? How well did they do at preserving their faith and passing that faith on to their children, right? And that sense that family was important onto their children. And then that generation, our generation, how well have we done passing that on to our kids and encourage and showing them what really matters, right? And I think we went through this cycle after World War II of people seeking material happiness and seeking material goods, material prosperity. And so you have that, baby boomer generation picking that torch up and, really amassing wealth, amassing second homes, third homes, amassing, tremendous advantages at the expense of younger generation, and potentially not investing in that next generation in the way they should. And then that cycle has gone on. And I think that there are signs that it's turning, right? There are signs that this younger generation, newer generation coming of age now, they're not seeking so much after, the material prosperity and the let me amass a fortune type of lifestyle. They're amassing experiences and they're trying new things. But, reality shows, or history shows, family is real social security, right?
Mhm.
That's where real joy comes from, is having family and investing yourself in your family and in growing, pouring yourself into that, giving, that sense of giving and then giving more. And there's tremendous joy in that.
What do you hope your sons remember about you when you pass away?
I hope that they remember that I kept the faith, and that, even when things got hard, that I didn't abandon the faith, that I didn't abandon my commitments and my obligations. That's what I hope they remember.
Okay. Kind of switching gears a little bit. About a month ago, you put it all on the line the way that I think most people never will. I don't think I ever will. I don't think I have the desire to, not even in a small election. But you ran for US Senate. Can you take me there? Right? What was that? What was the drive? What made you want to do it? I know that you were running on a fraction of what the incumbent had to spend, which by any means he's a 18-year incumbent, right? How does an iron worker from Morley, Idaho decide to challenge an 18-year incumbent?
Really comes down to what we're talking about, like around the monastery, right? What does God want? I had the thought to do this about 18 years ago, and at the time my mentor said, no, it's not time yet, but if God wants you to do this, he'll let you know. And in 2024, I felt very much like God said, hey, do this. And it was confirmed by one of my other mentors that said, now's the time to do it. And so we put the effort in. We worked all through 2025, building up some base, building up credibility, as far as the public facing image and the public references. That was a part of the desire to write my memoir, was to go, okay, if people, the number one obstacle is people don't know who you are. Well, then we can write a memoir and they can know who I am and where I've been and what I've been through, and go, is this the type of man that we would like to represent us? And I'm very proud of the fact that it's become an international bestseller. Like that's a pretty rare thing to have happen. And then, we took a fair bit of the money that I had earned and saved over the years to put at traveling the state and talking with people and, putting it out there on the line that, yes, I am challenging this person who's been in the Senate for 18 years and who's been, a lifetime career politician, right? I mean,
Yeah. That's definitely tough, especially the way things are run, I think. So you kind of just mentioned a little bit, but you were running on a fraction of what the incumbent had to spend. Did that teach you anything about what
correct.
did that teach you anything about what actually moves people versus what money moves?
It confirmed it more than anything, right? Like in today's political climate, if you're an outsider, then the money matters. If you're an insider, if you've been a political, career politician, and it's one career politician fighting another career politician, there's more name recognition. There's more people are willing to pay more attention. But if you're an outsider, the money does matter, right? Because the amount of campaign ads and campaign spending that went on in the last 6 weeks of the election was pretty large for a state like Idaho. It's not like what happened in Texas in your guys' primary down there this past year. But, for Idaho, it was a lot. It was a lot.
What surprised the most about the experience of running?
Well, two things. On the one side, we got the attention of some very powerful people at the national level, right? Some very, very powerful people in the government actually weighed in on our campaign, and our campaign team quit on launch day. I had to find a new campaign team right as we were launching the campaign. That tells me that we were doing some of the right things, and that there was some people were going, hey, we want to make sure this doesn't get off the ground. But then the other big thing that surprised me was, it's like David, right? I'm aware of my sinfulness and my weaknesses.
It's my favorite story from the Bible.
And so to have people come away inspired by what I'm doing it still surprises me, because I don't look in the mirror and like, man, I'm so inspired to see you this morning.
What was the hardest part of the whole thing? I'm pretty sure the campaign was pretty hard, but what was it harder for you personally?
The fundraising side of things was challenging, right? It's one thing to inspire people and have them talk about how you're inspiring them, and it's another when they say, I really like what you're about and I like what you're doing, but no, I won't help you out with the campaign. I won't help you out financially, right? That's that was challenging.
They're not putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah. So
I bet that could be hard. So as I understood, you didn't win, or else we probably wouldn't be talking today. What did losing teach you that winning never could? And would you do it again?
I'll take the second one. I would do it again. I would do it again. And I think in this case, this particular, losing the results in the election, I don't know. I went into it thinking, all right, you're taking on a national level opponent. You probably need someone who has experience running a national level campaign, for a national office. And so when the first campaign team quit and we ended up rebuilding, we probably would have done well to rebuild on a local level. The flip side of that, as an outsider and as a small, as an unknown, if you decide to do things the way everyone else does things, then you'll get the same results they get.
Yeah.
And so when I look at the results that we got, I go, okay, we knew that doing the standard, hey, you're going to run a campaign like everybody else does, and you're going to send out a mailer or two, and you're going to run a few TV commercials. We knew we could get 30 or 40,000 votes, no problem. But we also knew that wasn't going to win. And so, we tried a different strategy, and, and that strategy was, I think, a sound strategy. We didn't, and at the end of the day, didn't have the financial resources to really push it all the way that we needed to.
So I'm gonna close it up. I'm gonna give you some rapid fire questions. First thing that comes to mind: what is something that you believe now that you didn't believe at 30?
That I'm a very strong and attractive man.
I get it. What does success mean to you today? And then is it the same answer as 10 years ago, or is it different?
That is the same answer, and I very much believe in the John Dudek theory of success, that it's the ongoing pursuit of worthwhile goals, or the ongoing progress towards worthwhile goals. That's what success is. It's not achieving any one particular thing, but it's the continual progress toward worthwhile goals. So,
what responsibility weighs on you the most right now?
it's a close tie between the weight I feel about fathering my sons and helping shepherd them into adulthood, into manhood, and the restoration and healing of my relationship with my wife.
I like that. What are you still working on today, honestly?
There are levels upon levels to go in my relationship with God.
Final 2 questions. If any one of your sons watches this conversation 20 years from now, what is the one thing you hope he hears?
I hope he recalls the part about him being a beloved child of God, and that God wants to have a deeply personal relationship with him.
Last one. What does being all in mean to you?
It means there's no half measures, right? It means when you do something that you should pursue it in a manner that's to be the best or to be excellent at what it is. That's the quick answer. That's the short answer, right? I took up golf a year ago, right? I took up golf just a little over a year ago. And for example, I've taken multiple lessons, multiple, 2-day seminars. I spent a ton of time practicing on the range because I want to be as good as I can be at that game. And so to me, it's worth putting in the time and effort, that if I'm going to go spend the time and the money to go play this game with other people, it's worth it to invest the time and money to be good at doing that. That to me is all in.
I like it. Denny, thank you so much for coming with me today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Once you make it to the Senate floor, don't forget about us all little people out in Texas. And I think you have a website where people can go check you out. I believe it's New Lion. Is it New Lion
New Lion of Idaho.
Of Idaho. Sorry, it's like I need reading glasses. I'm starting to get my age starting to show, and I'm like trying to squint, trying to see it. newlionofidaho.com. You can find your book there, right? All about you, how to contact you. Anywhere else that people can find you, or do you want to tell the people that listen?
No, I mean, if they're interested in the book, I mean, the book is called Blue Collar Blessed. People find it very inspiring. And it's, there's a reason it's become an international bestseller, right? People. Yeah. And
I do have to say, I was on my list to read. I was trying to read it before I interviewed you today, but I do work 72 hours a week usually, and
woofed.
And then I try to do the podcast, and so I didn't get to. So I apologize about that, but I will get to it. It's on my list. Yes,
that's all in right there.
Danny, thank you so much. If you ever need anything in Texas, let me know.
All right, thank you, Raul. Take care.
You too. Okay.